Hey, everybody, it's Scott Golden, and welcome to the next episode of From the Ground Up, a podcast about autism, faith, and family. And I'm joined by my co host, Megan Halpert. Welcome, Megan. Glad to see you again. How are you
Ye-
tonight?
I'm good, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing great. And you may be joining us for the first time. And just to tell you a little bit about ourselves and what this podcast is designed to do is we want to be a resource for families that are first finding out about their autism diagnosis, to give them real answers to some of the questions they may have. And we also want to touch on two other topics, and that's faith, because we feel like there's a real challenge to our faith when we're in this situation, and we want to provide some guidance through that. And then also, we feel like it's not just about one child, it's about how the entire family approaches autism. And so, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about some secrets to help you navigate this so that the entire family stays together and stays strong. And a little bit about my story: I'm a father of a 21-year-old autistic son. Basically, I'm just an autism dad and have had a lot of experience in that area, just knowing what it's like, and want to just serve as somebody that can provide a little bit of guidance there. The real brains behind the operation is Megan. Megan, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So, Scott, I am a board certified behavior analyst, or
Mhm.
for short, BCBA. I have worked in the field of autism for over 13 years, been a BCBA for 11 of those years, working primarily, obviously, with children with autism. I've worked in the school setting. I own my own private clinic providing behavioral therapy for children. I've collaborated with all kinds of professionals, occupational therapists, speech therapists, consulted with public schools, private schools, taught at the collegiate level. So, have a pretty extensive background in all things autism, from
Yes.
the family to the child, and even the dynamics of aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, because as we know, and as you can, I'm sure, speak to, autism impacts the entire family.
Yes.
And so, our goal, as you had mentioned here, is to really talk about that impact from three different angles: from initial diagnosis, and then how that diagnosis obviously impacts the family, but also how it impacts the faith. In working with families, that's one thing that I've seen consistently is everybody has a struggle at some point in their journey with their faith. And so we really want to talk about that. We want to hit that head on, so to speak, because we don't want people to feel ashamed or disappointed or discouraged with themselves, because we've all wrestled with it at some point, whether it be with our autism journey or it be other challenges we've had.
Well, and we know that being the parents of special needs children can be very isolating, and it can have a real big impact on our faith because we feel like we're the only people that are walking that road. And what we want to share with you is there's a lot of people walking this road, and that there can be some joy along the way as we walk this road, and it can be very impactful to those that are around us. And in fact, I like to tell people it may be our best testimony to others is how we walk this road, the road that we're on. Megan, and just one other thing, Megan was BCBA for our son Colby and did a great job. And you're going to be blessed by what you're going to hear tonight if this is new to you, because we're going to take on a topic, and I'm going to have a hard time saying I'm excited about this topic, except to say that this is a topic that you have to understand if you're going to make this journey, and you're going to join the battle for your child. And that is, you have to understand the insurance process, because let's face it, in most cases, insurance is going to fund the therapies that you're going to be able to get for your child. And if you don't understand what this process looks like, it's going to be a real difficult journey. And Megan has laid out for the next, 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have like
Mhm.
we're going to start from zero, right, Megan? And we're going to build on
Yes.
it, so that if you don't know anything about insurance tonight, that's okay, because we're going to start from zero. And if you already know a lot of this stuff, if you want to fast forward through this section, that's fine. But understand, we want to start from zero and take you to, in a couple of weeks, becoming an expert in the insurance process and knowing what it's like. And with that, Megan, I know that you've dealt with insurance for a long time. What's, just in general, what do you think is maybe the biggest misconception people have about insurance, or the biggest thing that they don't get right when it comes to insurance?
I love that you said dealt with, because that's a perfect example. Insurance is not a fun thing, it's not enjoyable. And it's so important for families to get everything in writing. There's different aspects, and we'll get into this probably week 2, week 3, but when you have insurance, it's really important to know what your benefits are, what those cover, what they don't cover, what type of policy you have. And so there's a lot of questions that families don't even know to ask. And so that's what I really wanted to start in on in this conversation, and starting to share those basics of insurance, and knowing that. And let's be
And
honest, Scott, a lot of us don't even use insurance or don't know about it until we have to know about it, right?
right,
And
and this is true with everything, not just autism, just in general.
yeah.
And one point I want to make, Megan, what we're going to cover is also posted on your website, so that when if you don't want to stop right now and go to the website, maybe make notes on it, they can download this, print it out, and take notes on it. Or if you just need to refer to it at a later time, you can get that from Megan's website, right?
Yes, I will actually have a walkthrough guide that they can go and download that will literally give them a place to write the answers to the questions they need to ask that we're gonna talk about over the next several weeks. So it's gonna be a very valuable resource, but something they can always have in hand with them, because having conversations with your providers and having everything in writing with documentation is so important when it comes to insurance and the benefits that your policies have. So I think the first thing we need to realize and talk about are the different types of policies. There are what are called PPO policies. Those policies are considered preferred provider organizations. A provider is a doctor. It can be a hospital. It can be a lab that does blood work. It's going to be a speech therapist, occupational therapist, a home health provider group. Those are all considered providers. So a provider doesn't necessarily have to be an actual human. It can be an organization as well.
Okay.
And PPOs are typically providers that have a contract with the insurance company that say, hey, we will provide these services to your members or to the people that have policies through you. They're the ones that have a lot more flexibility within who you can see, when you can see them. They typically will not require a referral, so they don't have to have somebody refer you to that specialist. You can just go and seek that service from that specialist without having to have somebody send you there. And then they also sometimes will cover out of network costs, which means if you find a provider that you really like and they're not in that network, you can typically still see that provider. It'll just cost you a little bit more. I know a
Okay.
lot of the times parents will find a provider, a speech therapist, occupational therapist, ABA organization that they really like, but they're out of network. That PPO policy will typically still cover. It will just be a little bit more expensive for the family.
Do we want to mention what in network and out of network is? Is that, I know it's basic, but we said we would go right to the very basic
Yes.
parts here, right?
Yes.
So,
So in-network is just a fancy term that says those providers have a contract with the insurance company to be paid a specific amount and to provide a service to those individuals that have that policy. Out of network means there's no contract. That means that the insurance company is going to pay a certain amount for that service. As a beneficiary or as a individual with that policy, you may have to pay additional money outside of what insurance is going to pay. Let's say, for example, you go to a provider that's out of network and it's a $100 copay. The insurance company is going to pay part of that, and the provider can bill the family for the other part of it. I highly recommend finding in-network providers if you can. Just the costs are a lot less, but they can also, we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks when we go into more of in-network and out-of-network. You can request what are called single case agreements. So you can request, I know this provider is out of network, but I'd really like to see them. Can you give them a single case agreement, which is a single contract to see my child?
oh,
And there's certain things that you can argue to ask for that.
I didn't even know that was available. Oh, we got to get into that pretty soon here,
Yes,
Megan. That's
yes,
good stuff.
yes.
Okay.
And there's certain like I said, there's certain limitations and arguing points, if you will, to ask for that or to advocate for that. Then you have what are called HMOs, which stand for health maintenance organizations. Those are a lot more restricted and limited on their coverage from providers. They don't cover out of network costs, so you have to only see the people that are in their network, unless it's an emergency, right? Something that's beyond your control. They'll typically cover that, but not not at a rate that you're probably going to be comfortable with. And then they also require referrals. So one of the hiccups I've seen a lot of families that have HMO policies is their child will get a diagnosis of autism, and then they have to go to the doctor and have the doctor refer them to get ABA services, versus they have the diagnosis, they can just go to whatever provider they want. That referral can also limit access to care. It can limit the time frame in which kids are getting that care as well.
Okay.
One of the most important things a lot of families don't know or don't realize unless they ask this question is if their policy is what's considered a self-funded policy. Self-funded policies are basically when the employer takes much of the cost of all of the claims that the insurance company just manages the payment.
Hmm.
When your company says, "Okay, we're gonna provide you these insurance benefits, but we're gonna pay for all the claims," they also get to determine what they're gonna cover.
And if I remember right, because I worked for a couple of Fortune 500 companies, and they would say they were self-funded, even though an insurance company managed the process, the fund that they didn't provide any insurance. They just managed the administration of the payments, right? So
Correct.
you would have to work for a pretty large company for it to be a self-funded company. But there's a lot of people out there that work for large companies that do that, right?
I have heard of different co-ops also that will be self-funded. They're really one-off policies, but they do exist out there, and typically, when we look at laws and regulations and things like that, self-funded policies aren't required to follow state mandates, and we'll talk about this a little bit here in a little bit after I get over go over all these policies, but
Mhm.
like I said, self-funded policies aren't required to cover care for certain things, so the benefits are very limited, and I've come across several self-funded policies that don't cover have 0 autism benefit. So it's something that's really important for families to know is if my policy is self-funded or not, and if it is self-funded, are there any autism benefits?
Mhm.
And then the last policy we were gonna talk about is Medicaid. That's obviously state and federal health coverage designed for low-income individuals and families, as well as children and elderly with disabilities. Not every state has Medicaid funding for autism, specifically for ABA. Texas just rolled this out a couple of years ago. They've been definitely behind the ball on
Mhm.
that for several years. Proud to say Indiana was one of the first to have Medicaid cover ABA. So that's definitely we're moving in the right direction. We're trending in the right direction overall as a country, but that's still something that's very new to some states. When I talk about those different policies, it's important to know which of those types of policies you have. And then of those policies, do I only have one policy or do I have two? Sometimes husbands have a policy, wives have a policy. And which one are my kids on? Are my
Mhm.
kids eligible for Medicaid? And searching, going through those questions and evaluating those. And then looking at if we both have policies that would cover autism services, who has the better benefits? And when I talk about benefits, I want to talk about what those are. Benefits when it comes to insurance are things like what are considered a copay. So that's an amount that you would pay every single visit. It can range from anywhere from $10 to $50. So every time you go to the doctor, every time you go to a speech appointment, every time your child receives ABA therapy, or every time they go to an occupational therapy appointment, you're going to have a copay. You're going to pay a flat rate for that appointment. Coinsurance is a little bit different. It's a percentage of the cost of that appointment. So typically it's about 10 to 20% depending on the service and kind of how the policy ranks that service. So for example, if you have a child that is receiving I'm going to talk ABA therapy because obviously that's my wheelhouse. That's receiving ABA therapy and the total cost for the services for that day was $100 and you have a 20% copay, then you're going to pay 20% of that $100 every day that kid is in therapy or every time your child receives therapy. It's also important to realize what your deductible is. The deductible is the amount that you have to pay as the beneficiary before insurance is going to even pay their first penny. So deductibles can range anywhere from $500 to $2,000 to $5,000 depending on the type of policy that you have. Once that deductible is met, then that either coinsurance or that copayment is going to kick in. Let's say your child is receiving, again, ABA therapy, and you have a $2,000 deductible with a $5,000 out of pocket maximum. You're going to pay the first $2,000 of that deductible. Then your copay or your coinsurance is going to kick in, and you're going to pay that amount until you hit that maximum out of pocket. Maximum out of pocket is the most you would pay within a calendar year for all medical services. So that means my kid has a cough and I take him to the doctor and I pay a copay for that. My child had to go have blood work done for, I don't know, for some testing they had done. They had OT, they had PT. All of those things cumulatively together go towards that out-of-pocket maximum, and once that is paid, then you don't have to pay anything for the rest of the calendar year if you have a calendar year policy.
So a little secret in the Golden family is Julie and I take bets on when we're going to hit our out of pocket maximum. We have an over or under sometime toward the end of February, especially during those years where Colby was really getting a lot of expenses. It was like, okay, hey, we spent a lot of money in January and February. That's all we got to spend now. Whatever he wants, he gets now.
And it's also
That's a
important.
big day in a family's life when you hit that out of pocket maximum.
But then there's also times where if there's some other things that need to happen from a medical standpoint for that child, plan them for that year to happen after that out of
Yes.
pocket has been met. I know that families have said, "We met our family out of pocket in July, and mom's gotta have this done, and dad needs to have this done. We're
Yeah.
getting it done." But I'm like, "Do it, go for
Yeah.
it." For sure, use those benefits, that's what they're there for. Yeah, so that's really the basics, and just to add again, that premium the premium is what basically you pay or the employer pays per month for those benefits. Sometimes an employer will pay 100% of that premium, sometimes it's split with the employee. I think that just again, I wanna go over those real basics to build that foundation for our coming conversations in the next few weeks, because we'll have to dive into those things a little bit more and give some more insight on, okay, if I have this and I come to this roadblock, how do I navigate around it?
I know from a personal testimony that my wife has told me is Megan had worked so hard on our behalf to help us to maximize the insurance benefits that we had available. And that is a service that you offer now through your consulting company, right, Megan? So that if somebody is struggling through this insurance minefield and would like to schedule a consultation with you, it may be worth them spending a few bucks in order to get a real clear picture of what they may be missing or what other services they may be entitled to, right?
Absolutely. It's so important to get these things in writing, because if you ever get denials or things like that, if you can get it in writing and see it in writing, then it's really hard for the insurance companies to say, no, we're not going to pay for that, or that's not covered. I've had lots of those lovely conversations. I'm a firm believer in the best way to beat the enemy is to know how they work and what makes them tick.
What's your process for getting everything in writing? Is it just a matter of asking the associate that's on the other end of the call, "Hey, here's my email address. Could you please tap out an email real quick that and then file that away somewhere so that you've got that for future reference?"
So from a provider standpoint, I'm in network with several different insurance companies, and so I have access to pull policy documents and policy information for patients. So I can pull what the policy covers. The families also get a policy book that has all of that written in it. Sometimes it's a small little pamphlet. Sometimes it's super thick. A lot of the times they'll tell them to go to this website and you can pull your policy manual. And so looking at those things in that policy manual is very important. Also, always getting names, dates, times, and reference calls for phone numbers, so that those, because insurance companies log every single phone call that's ever made.
Okay.
Typically, they say it's for quality assurance purposes, but it also can be a benefit for the parent or the beneficiary calling if there's a misquote of
It's for
benefits.
covering the backside is what it's
Yep,
for.
yep,
It's for covering
yep.
the backside, okay?
Yeah.
That's why they record it. So
So, and a lot of I mean, I've done this for so long, I can look at a policy pretty quickly and tell you what's covered, what's not, how to navigate around it. Some policies, ironically, they'll cover treatment, but they won't cover diagnostics of autism, which blows my mind. Or they'll require families to go get evaluation every so many years, but then they won't pay for the reassessment. And so just being able to know those things and navigate those things is very important, and it can save so much time on the front end of all of this, because I know so many families will dive in because they're just so eagerly wanting to get their kid into treatment, into services, which is obviously so critical, but they get in and they're all of a sudden getting these massive bills from or from the providers, and the insurance is just a hot mess. And so having to sort through that now, while they're also trying to run their child all these treatments and do all of the things, can be very overwhelming. So taking that first step and investing in that in the first phase of this is so important and so critical.
I think it's true too that not every provider really understands the insurance as well. So you can't always rely on what your provider is telling you as being necessarily the absolute or the final say in everything. And so this is where you have to become your best advocate. And sometimes you just have to decide you're not going to take no for an answer until you've heard it 3 or 4 times. And then after you've heard it 3 or 4 times, okay, I'm time for me to take a different tack here. But
Yep.
don't always just take that first "oh" and think that's going to be the answer. You sometimes have to talk to multiple people
Mhm.
and really be an advocate for your child here, right?
Yep. Agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so the audience can expect over the next couple of weeks that we're going to continue to build on this. So if you got something out of this, you got even something better going forward. If you didn't feel it applied, hang on, it's coming. Okay, there's going to be a point in this where you're going to get something out of it. Let's talk for a minute about, because we also talk about faith and family. Our original verse for from the ground up is a verse in John 9, where Jesus is asked by his disciples why a man was blind from birth. Was it a sin that he committed or a sin that his parents committed? And Jesus makes this clear: it's not because of a sin. This person is this way to show the glory of God and what God can fulfill. And we truly believe that in the autism community, that God's going to be glorified by the path that we're on, some way, somehow. So, do you mind kind of sharing with us some of the examples that you feel fit that story, so that people can see that there is something, that God can have a purpose behind all of this in some way?
Absolutely. So when we read John 9 and we read a little bit further down, we learn that the man goes back to the town where he's from and people are can don't even recognize him, don't identify him because he's so different than how he was before. And I find it really interesting when I was reading through that how he reaches the people in his town and their perspective of Jesus changes totally. And even the enemies are like, "Okay, who's this guy that healed you? What's going on here?" How and then that man reached people and let people know about Jesus. And so it was just very interesting to me how he reached his enemies. People were talking, wanting to know more, and how that made a difference in the lives of other people. And so I take that. I've got several different stories. I'll share a couple of them with you, but I had a little guy who I worked with for, oh gosh, 4 years. He's now becoming a preteen and doing all the cool things, but I remember when he left treatment with us and was going into kindergarten. And he had a teacher that, and to no fault of the educators, sometimes they just see this child as autism, they're coming to my classroom, they're a little bit anxious because they don't know exactly what that looks like. And so this teacher shared with us, it was more towards the end of the year, but how when she saw that he was coming into her class, she was very anxious and very nervous about how it was gonna the dynamic of her classroom was going to be. And I worked very collaboratively with her. His mom worked very collaboratively with her throughout the year. And he had a wonderful, he was a neurotypical classroom. He had a wonderful first year of kindergarten. And that teacher told us at the end of the year, having him in my class completely changed my perspective of autism to the point where she went to the principal and said, "Hey, if we have any kids in the future that are going to be on the spectrum, I'm more than happy to have them in my classroom. I really enjoyed working with
Wow.
and that one kiddo paved the path for so many more children. And I just thought, wow, like that and this little boy is just amazing, but there's so many other little stories that just these little tidbits help and have opened the door to others and for kids of that are gonna be following in their footsteps. When I first started in the field, before I was a BCBA, I worked as a behavior specialist for a school district, and I worked with a second grade teacher who had one of our more challenging kids in her classroom, and she was phenomenal, she's great. But this was, again, her first encounter working with a child on the spectrum that had some pretty significant behaviors. And so she really learned a lot. She learned that she loved it and then she enjoyed it. And the next year, she left the general education classroom to take over the special education inclusion classroom as well as some and help to oversee some of the life skills kids. And
Wow.
then she went on to change her career path completely and ended up being like a curriculum specialist for special ed and really advocating and doing some trainings across the whole multiple districts in the Texas has their schools and regions. And so working for the region to advocate for kids with special needs. Parents may not see it in the moment, but their child is impacting things so greatly for others in the future. And I just think when we step back and we just take a deep breath and look at these paths that God is making, we can see them. They're so clear. So
Absolutely. Well, and I wanted to share a recent story. I was, not to scoreboard anybody, but I just got back from Italy. It was a nice trip. It was a lot of fun. And one evening we were having dinner and we started up a conversation with a couple that was next in the table next to us. And they were from Vienna, Austria. And we talked about America. We talked about Europe. We talked about Russia. We talked about Trump. We talked about everything. And it wasn't until the end, we talked about his McLarens. This guy had 5 sports cars. He's probably got about $2 million sitting in his garage. So I'm trying to get a trip to Vienna coming up here. So, but it was really interesting as we talked. It wasn't until the end where I shared what my path, that I had a 21-year-old autistic son. And this is a passion of mine, is to try to work with families with special needs children. And it caught him off guard for a second. And he goes, my brother has a special needs granddaughter. And he started just peppering me with questions. Just, what do I do? What can I do? And it was because it was right at the close of the evening. The restaurant was closing. We'd had a 2.5 hour dinner, and it was a wonderful time. But I didn't get to answer this one question, and it's something I wanted to maybe answer to the audience as a whole. And he said, "What can I do to encourage my brother in all of this?" And I gave him an answer, but it wasn't really the answer that I wanted, because what I wanted to give is this: is you have to find God's purpose in what it is that you're going through. You have to recognize that God has a purpose in this. I don't believe that God is involved in the suffering that you're in. I don't think he caused the autism. I don't think he caused, in this case, the child was deformed physically. I don't think God causes that. God doesn't participate in evil, that God doesn't participate in hurting people. But I do believe that God can use the suffering that we have for his purpose. And sometimes it takes you a while to see it. But if I could encourage anybody right now that's struggling with their faith, that's trying to figure out, why am I going through what I'm going through? Why is it my child? And we've all asked those questions, is to take some time and really determine, what purpose could God have for all of this? What good could come out of this? What people could be blessed by this? And if you will set aside and determine that you're going to live your life in a way that's going to bring purpose to this, and you're going to serve God through this, it can be a huge blessing for you. It may take a while. I promise you, there may be days where you're like, I don't want to be, I don't want this. But somewhere along the line, you're going to turn around and you go, some people's lives have been changed and are different and are better because of what I've gone through and because of what I've been challenged with. So if I can just encourage you, think through that. And that brings me to the point of family, because I can tell you that our family is different because we have a special needs son. And you may want to look at how that could have a positive impact on your family. In my case, I have 2 older daughters and I've already told this story, so I apologize, but I'm going to brag on them again for a minute. That as they saw what people were doing to help their brother, they became committed to working with the special needs community. One daughter actually became a minister of special needs at our church, helped establish a special needs ministry, and now has gone on to become the next Megan out there. She's a BCBA rock star, or working on that. She's close to finishing that. And then my other daughter became a speech pathologist. She's actually gone to Africa to work with children. She's even in a more far off place than that now. She's in New York City working with people but you can have a positive impact on the siblings and the other members of your family because of what that child's going through. And Megan, you've probably seen it, right? You've seen families that have been blessed in all of this, right?
Absolutely. And to be honest, having an opportunity to serve these families is a blessing to me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about Colby here for a minute, because I just adore that kid. Just love him. I just wanna squeeze him.
He's quite handsome, like his
He
father.
is. He is. He looks more like his mom, but we'll
Yes,
just
he does.
but he just the simple things that he enjoys and that he loves, and just to see the simplicity of things that he enjoys. My kids love and adore him. They wanna get on the computer and play games with Colby, and I a couple weeks ago, I was at a sale thing, and I found Colby loves Sesame Street. Like, that is his jam, and when you become in Colby's circle, you become a Sesame Street character. I do have a Sesame Street character. That's one of the most proud things I have to tell people. I am Baby Bear,
I'm Oscar the Grouch.
ironically.
Yeah. Imagine that. He nailed it. I'm just saying, he did. He nailed it.
Man, he nails when he gives people characters, and Colby, and you're like, "Yep,
That's
yep,
it.
nailed that one. He
Yeah.
nailed that one." But just the joy that he brings me and being able to I found a really cool thing that I knew that he would love. It had and he's an old school Sesame Street guy.
Mhm.
He's not into the new ones. He likes the good classics, right?
Yes.
But found that for him, and I was so stinking excited to buy that for him. And being able to give a gift to somebody else, like, being able to give him a gift that brought joy to me. And so our kids, yeah. Colby's my kid too, by the way. I didn't give birth to him, but I just love him as if he's my own. But our being able to have the opportunity to serve and love these kids and provide them things and gift them things and share things with them that we know that they're enjoying, I think is so important as well. And just the education piece. I know my kids, I have heard from Grayson's teachers that he's the kid in class that will want to go and help other kids that he identifies as having some trouble with different things. And I know that he's a kid that that teachers can say, "Hey, can you go help this child with this because maybe they're struggling." It may be a child that's a bilanguage learner, things like that. He's a kid that they can have him go and sit with that child and offer that additional support. Even in those ways, and that exposure is blessing others through
And
that.
I'd like to challenge the parents that are listening to this. For your kids that aren't autistic, I would like to challenge you in this way. And that is, um, there's a whole lot of things you can teach your kids about Christianity. Okay. But I don't think there's anything more important than you can teach your kid is as to how Jesus would treat other people. And Jesus was always the champion for those that were what I refer to as less than, those that were the outcasts, those that were on the edges. That's who Jesus reached out to. And if we're going to teach our kids to be like Christ, which I think is what we're supposed to do, we need to spend less time talking about cleaning your room and all these other things, and let's teach them to treat all the kids in their classroom and all the kids they come up with and their autistic sibling to treat them like Christ, and to look for coaching opportunities to say, here is how you treat somebody else like Christ would treat them. And the reason why I say that is we want to build faith in our children that lasts a lifetime, not just one that lasts through high school. And if we teach them that kind of Christianity that says part of my role is to stand up for those that are on the edges and the fringes, they their faith will be real to them from a very early age, and it will last a lifetime. So look for that ways that you can do that, and not just to help for helping your child, but to help everyone to be that kind of person. They'll have a lifelong faith, and that's really what we're looking for out of our families. So Megan, is there anything else we need to cover tonight, or is that
We got all kinds of things to cover,
okay?
but we want these people to keep coming back for
Yeah.
more, right?
Yeah, we've preached enough. Listen, everybody, I just know that it's a great joy for us to be able to just share these kind of things with you. Hopefully, you're getting something from it. Megan, a couple of things we'd want to ask them to do on your end because you serve as a great resource. Do you want to share with a couple of the things they may want to follow up with?
Absolutely. Like I said, I've mentioned it multiple times, but I'd love for people to go to my website, haupertconsulting.com, and check out the services that I offer. Also, look me up on Facebook and Instagram. Every Tuesday, I post Tuesday tips. They're really basic parenting pieces of advice that are great for not only kids on the spectrum, but kids in general, things I use with my children at home. Just a few short little snippets that you can implement immediately in your house to just help shape behavior and help kids from a positive standpoint when we're
Is
looking
that
at
on your
behavior.
personal or is that on the
It's
autism?
on it's on Hopper Consulting. So,
Oh, okay. All right.
Hopper Consulting has a Facebook page, and
Facebook.
we also have an Instagram.
Okay.
And then also, I'd love for people to check out our Facebook page for our podcast,
Yeah.
From the Ground Up. And then also, we've got all kinds of things on our podcast Facebook page. They'll be able to access other episodes that we've had, get some more insight and resources, hoping we can put some encouraging stories from our listeners on there as well, and just really become a platform for families to go and seek hope and encouragement from others.
And then I'd also like to say that if you live in Tarrant County, I'm a member of the Hills Church. We have 3 campuses. We have one in Keller, one in North Richland Hills, and one in West Fort Worth. All 3 campuses have special needs ministries that are designed to meet the needs of families with special needs children. And we have respite nights. We have programs for them on Sunday mornings. We have trained people to help. We're not just going to have you drop them off and not have any idea what's going on. We've got a system in place to make sure that your child has a successful experience in our special needs ministry. So if you're looking for a church that is going to be able to reach out and take you in, we would love for you to be a part of that. The other thing is we've got a special needs class that's going to be, or a marriage enrichment class that's going to be starting in the beginning of January at our Keller campus. I just wanted to announce this. It's coming up. If you'll contact me, I've got one of those old school email addresses, segaulden@aol.com. Okay. If you'll contact me, I'll make sure that you get put on the list. It's strictly for parents with special needs kids, but it's a marriage class. So you'd be in a classroom with people that are on the same path as you. We're going to be talking about ways that we can strengthen our marriages. If any of that is a benefit to you, we would love to hear from you and be able to assist you in any way that we can there. So, Megan, thanks for being here tonight. We've got some more insurance coming up. Listen to our next podcast, and we will see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.